Okay, this is I'm going to be showing you, uh, talking about St. Augustine and his book, City of God. St. Augustine was a saint, is a saint of the Catholicism, Catholic Church. He's one of the most revered and popular saints, in my opinion. He was alive during the 400, 300 range during the fall of Rome. So when the Rome fell, St. Augustine was around to write about it. And he uses mythology to explain everything. And so when I found St. Augustine, I was very excited about reading his book, City of God. You can get a PDF for free, City of God. It's very awesome. Now, what's so awesome about it is that I discovered a saint, Augustine, that is going to write about the same thing I'm trying to figure out, the same interests I have, and the way he writes about explains the Christianity, the way he explains the theology of Christianity is using mythology and the goddesses and gods in the Trojan conflict. So understand that before I met St. Augustine, before I knew who he was, like I found him in his book, City of God, I actually was trying to understand using the same method he does. So I was trying to understand life and everything and what's wrong with the human race and why we're all screwed up and why we have conflicts and fights still and why there's wars, why we're having war in Ukraine, and when we're supposed to be civilized people and stuff. And ultimately, I used the same method. I was trying to understand using the Trojan conflict. It's where I went to. It's where my mind brought me to. I kept going back to Troy. That's where it all started. The war of Troy, the conflict in Troy, the Trojans that started the new Rome that fell, and Enos was the son of a Venus, the goddess Venus. She saved him in battle many times, and ultimately, Enos went on to start Rome through, I think, Romulus and Remus or something. But Enos was the spirit of Rome when it started. What that means is it had a mother Venus as a man who's actually having God, but it happens to be that his mother is Venus, and it happens to be that this is what St. Augustine would tell you, and ultimately the way that he explains everything is just ultimately exciting to me because he uses the mythology to express the Christianity, and ultimately it's in support of Christianity. So it talks about Christ and compares Christ to Apollo, the sun god. Ultimately, it's unbelievable that he can literally relate and link the two. So let's see, I'm going to get to starting here, talking about Apollo and the important things to know about Apollo, the sun god. He was, he's mentioned in his book all over the place. And so here we go. I'm just going to read some of it. Okay, by following the peaceful ways of Numa, of the statue of Apollo at Cuma, whose tears are supposed to have portended disaster to the Greeks, whom the god was unable to succor. So what this says in this first part is it says that the god Apollo, the defender of Troy, was not able to succor the Greeks. He didn't support the Greeks or aid them or give them relief in any way. He was protecting Troy. Now, he failed to protect Troy. Understand that the god Apollo utterly failed to actually protect Troy because Troy fell. So Apollo fell. Understand that if Apollo, the god, the sun god, he's the sun god, not the god of the sun, but he is his father. So the actual official title of Apollo would be the sun god, who's also his father, the sun, the god of the sun. So Zeus is the god of the sun and not the sun god, but he's the god of the sun, and Zeus is dad. And so the son of Zeus is the sun god, who's also his father in spirit. So the son could be the father, and it is the spirit, but the father is above the son and not the son necessarily. It's the father only. It could be a singular. The son will be being plural to be father. Now, the fact that Apollo did not aid the Greeks whatsoever, it was because he was trying to protect Troy. He wasn't interested in protecting the Greeks. He actually put the plague on Greece. So the Greeks on the beach were struck with plague for 9 days. Apollo, the sun god, made them all sick from a plague. He put the plague on the whole Greek society force that was attacking Troy, and it killed tens of thousands. Like people were dropping dead right and left from the plague, right within weeks from the time they got on that beach. It was because they defiled his high priest. Understand that Apollo he loved his city Troy. He loved his ego. He loved there were good egos. Egotistical behavior was not out of line yet. So understand that egotistical behavior became out of line and behaved wrong after Troy. So the Trojan conflict is what turned the ego in men into something bad or supposedly not good. Apollo was not able to aid or would not aid the Greeks, which made him one-sided only and protecting Troy only. He failed. He fell. So I'm trying to suggest Apollo fell. The god Apollo fell because Troy fell. Because Troy wouldn't have fallen. He was going to protect Troy and not let it fall. So the fact that Apollo failed, the god Apollo failed, it's because he was killed. He died. So, or he ran away and had to hide. So understand that whatever happened to him was he either ran away and had to hide because he was literally destroyed, or he was dead. I think he died. So he was killed. So the gods that supported the Greeks that were attacking Troy, that made Troy fall, were Athena, and Zeus was not wanting Troy to fall. But Zeus was also supporting Minerva, who's not Athena. Understand that they say that Minerva is a version of Rome, that is the Roman goddess. So Athena and Minerva are two different entities, and Athena was actually a god. Minerva was a goddess that had God in her. And so understand the goddess is a feminine, Minerva is a feminine, and Athena is not a feminine. She's a goddess that's actually masculine only. That's why they say that Athena came from her father's forehead, because Minerva came from the womb of her mother, who was also had her father. So Minerva was a mixture of feminine and masculine, and Athena was masculine only. So there were two different goddesses, and Athena was placed in charge, and the goddess of Troy that they couldn't lose. If they had kept Athena, they would have won, but they got sacked. They ultimately got sacked because Apollo failed to be able to protect Troy. And it was ultimately that if he would not have let them fall, which meant that Apollo had to have fallen. And ultimately, I think that Achilles killed him before the start of the war. Apollo, the sun god, was attacked by Achilles when the Myrmidons and Achilles hit the beach. They went right to the temple of Apollo and killed Apollo, the god who was living in it, or made him run away, because ultimately the entire Achilles removed the influence and protection from Troy from attacking the temple of Apollo. So the first thing Achilles did when he attacked that beach by himself with one ship with his 50 Myrmidons, he rushed the temple. And the reason why the god didn't see him is because the Myrmidons are from goddess. They're fighters that have the feminine, that are also masculine, but they have the feminine. They take the feminine on. They're like Achilles. The type of fighters the Myrmidons were like Achilles, and Achilles was his mother, Thetis, who's a goddess. So he was a demigod of this. So you can't say Achilles was a demigod, because he wasn't. His father was just a man. His mother was a goddess, Thetis, the full-fledged goddess, like Poseidon, and she was all powerful. And so basically Achilles' power came from his mother. He didn't have a god in him. He didn't have Zeus, other than to say he might have had Zeus like a man or a human has Zeus, could take his spirit, but it wasn't coming from himself. The fact that Achilles and his Myrmidons were divine feminine energy, they were able to attack that beach in what they call a goddess screen. The goddess screen meant that Apollo, the sun god, didn't see him coming. He saw the whole Greek fleet 5 hours out to sea, and he was watching it inside his temple. And Achilles and the Myrmidons snuck on a surprise attack, snuck to attack the temple and Apollo himself. And ultimately, I'm going to tell you that I think that Achilles actually killed the sun god Apollo. And ultimately, if he didn't, he injured him so bad that Apollo had to run away. Because what Achilles achieved by attacking that beach by himself was removing the protection of Apollo, the sun god, off Troy and off the beach. That's how the Greeks were even able to get there. Understand, with Apollo in his temple on the beach, there was no way that the Greek fleet could even approach the shores of Troy, because they would have been warded off by the power of the mighty god Apollo, the god, sun god. He was going to, his protection on the beaches was true and real and powerful, which meant that like you couldn't even approach the beach. The Greek fleet would have said, we can't even get near that place, man. And they'd be like, wow. And ultimately, Achilles' job was to go attack the temple of Apollo, and he beheaded a statue. I say it could have been the real Apollo. So understand that in the actual movie, the first thing Achilles does when he gets on that beach is he goes right to the temple of Apollo, and Eudorus, his number one Myrmidon general, says to him, are you sure we're going to attack the temple of Apollo? Like, Apollo sees everything. And ultimately, Achilles beheaded the statue as a reaction to that comment, which meant that Achilles was going after Apollo and taking his head. In the movie, it's a statue in front of the temple that he takes the head off of Apollo. But ultimately, I'm going to tell you, the real truth is he actually killed Apollo, the god, inside the temple. Apollo lived there and loved Troy. So he lived among the Trojans. They called Troy the city of God. So understand, if St. Augustine is talking about a city of God that's different from Troy, well, he's relating it to Troy. It was a city of God because Apollo lived as a human person, a man, for over a year among the Trojans and befriended them and had dinner with them and lived in their houses. So did Poseidon, and so did Neptune. So we're talking about the gods actually living among the Trojans and getting to know them on a personal level. For it was under punishment. So they were being punished for trying to overthrow Zeus. So Zeus turned Apollo and Poseidon, his brother, into humans, or you could say Neptune. And he turned them into humans and made them build the walls of Troy. For a year it took to build those walls. Now, the trouble between Apollo and Troy had a lot to do with Priam's father, who had a grandfather who was also Priam's grandfather, who was, I don't remember his name, but Zeus gave him some horses that were divine horses, meaning the horses could run faster than any other horses. They were stronger, more powerful, and didn't tire. So there was breeds of horses back then that were considered divine. And it just meant the horse was ultimately a horse that didn't get tired. It ultimately was like a horse that you'd say, like, that horse, I could ride it all day and it doesn't even get tired or sweat it out. It doesn't need water for a long time. Like, that's powerful. That horse is awesome. Well, ultimately, there was horse breeding they were breeding horses that were divine. And so if you think of divine horses, like a horse that's just that great, well, they were trophies. Like if you owned a horse from Zeus or from a divine nature coming from any of the gods or goddesses, it was a horse that lived longer than all the other horses, was more powerful, was greater. So they were very valuable among the people, and they traded those horses. People who had them were important. Now, the grandfather, Priam, had some horses that were divine given to his grandfather, not Priam's grandfather. Well, it would have been down the line. The grandfather of Priam's grandfather had been given some horses by Zeus, and he had the horses, and ultimately, because of some things he did wrong, he pissed a god off. And so the god told him that he had to sacrifice his daughter and let the sea monster was going to come eat her. So he said that, you have to sacrifice your daughter or else I'll take your whole kingdom. And ultimately, when he put his daughter in chains on the beach, waiting for the sea monster to come, Hercules was around. Hercules was there and offered to save her by killing the creature when it came to eat her. So Hercules offered the grandfather the help because he just happened to be there. And he said, your daughter's going to die. You have to sacrifice her. And ultimately, I have to chain her up so the sea monster could eat her. And ultimately, it was a god that was mad at the Priam's grandfather that made him do it. And so when she was sitting there, Hercules said, if you give me those horses, those divine horses you have, I want to have them. So he said, I'll save your daughter by killing that creature, and the god can't get mad at me. So basically Hercules was volunteering to save her by killing the creature that was coming to eat her. So he killed her. So Hercules waited on the beach with her. And when the sea monster came from the ocean to come eat her, it came and it was going to eat her. And Hercules surprised it and attacked it from some rock he hiding behind. And ultimately, the creature was killed. Hercules killed the creature. And so then she was free. And so he saved her daughter. And then the grandfather wouldn't give him the horses. So that's just terrible. In other words, I can't believe it. So he wouldn't give Hercules the horses. That Hercules saved his daughter by killing the creature, and ultimately said, "I want the horses." And he said, "No." For some reason, he said, "You can't have the horses. They're too special to me. I can't give them up." So ultimately, I think that, I mean, you could look at something happened, and ultimately the king was wrong. So that was a Trojan king, Priam's grandfather, that was wrong, and was wrong to Hercules, promising him divine horses that Zeus gave him, or his grandfather. And when he went to collect, he wouldn't give them to him. And so Hercules killed him and his sons and all of his sons, and ultimately spared 2 of his sons. And Eos took those sons away to raise them up, because they wanted to save some of the bloodline of Troy, even though they killed some of it. They were killing off a part of the bloodline of Troy, of bad Trojan men. Well, yeah, that's what they thought. Hercules thought he didn't keep his promise or his word. So he died. He got killed. His sons got killed. Priam got saved. I think he was like the youngest son. Eos went to take care of him. So Eos was a very powerful, I'm not going to say goddess, but maybe a lesser goddess. Maybe she was a full-fledged goddess, but ultimately Eos, who took Priam, who became the king of Troy, she raised him for a while in some place where he was actually under the care of the gods and goddesses were. So the Troy was special, meaning not only did the king of Troy have a divine protection over him, he was special to the gods and goddesses. So the goddesses actually took care of Priam as a kid, and taught him how to be a great king, and then put him in a kingship. He was king of Troy, the last one. See, it went all wrong. And understand that understanding the conflict in Troy and the war, the Trojan War, can help you understand what is wrong with society today. Because understand that everything that happens to society after Troy is still happening now. Meaning the conflicts we have in this world are still happening, and it's a result of what happened in Troy. So you can go back to the spot that it's actually the spot. See, if you try to understand human conflict, why do humans war, shoot each other, kill each other? Why are they so? Why don't they have? Why can't the poor be rich too? Why can't we all be rich? We certainly could be. Certainly, if society wanted to, we could all be having whatever we want for free. Literally, if humans work together, we could have everything we want for free, and everybody would have an abundance of whatever they want. So ultimately, the poor are made to be what they are. Society demands we have a bunch of poor people. And for whatever reason that the poor are poor and they can't be rich, they're not allowed to be rich. If they were, then we would make them rich. So we're having a society that is condoning the poor population being poor. It's suppressing it, keeping it down. It's ultimately the way that the economy is run, by sucking off the poor, keeping them down. And ultimately, this is not to blame my country. It's not to blame my country, because my country is supposed to be my country. So ultimately, it's supposed to be that I'm in support of it, not against it or attacking it in any way. And I'm not. So I understand that what I'm trying to do is bring an awareness to anyone or society or whoever gets this live feed, and understand that I believe that somebody's getting it, specifically because God tells me to do this, and He says you're being seen. So I'm aware that I'm being seen by. There's people, a lot of them that are getting this video. I know it, and ultimately my views aren't a lot, but yeah, they are definitely sharing this video. Whoever, maybe 1 or 2 people that are getting it out. So it's why it's so important that I do these videos. Now, the conflicts in the human race are because of the way society is, and society condones suffering, and ultimately it's under punishment from God, which means that God is punishing us now. And ultimately, society suffers from sickness and plague and it's not by accident, meaning plague is put upon us. If you read the Bible and you read about the Pharaoh being plagued by God, God sent plagues to the Pharaoh. Understand that that's a truth you need to know about, because God does send plagues. Apollo sent plagues, and Apollo sent bad diseases onto people and made them sick and die by the thousands and hundreds of thousands. So you're looking at Apollo, the god who actually was loving to the Trojans, protected them, lived among them as a human for over a year, because he was being punished for trying to overthrow or being in on a coup with Hera, the wife of Zeus, the main goddess, the most powerful goddess was Hera, and she was she was the mother of goddesses, and Hera, well, Apollo and Poseidon agreed with Hera to overthrow Zeus, and they tried to tie him up when he's sleeping, and Zeus woke up and was tied up, and basically they were going to tie him up, and I don't know what they were going to do, kill him or trap him, and ultimately they were going to at least trap him permanently, or they were trying to. Well, it's unknown if they were actually trying to kill him or just trying to suppress him to lock him up, to take his power and lock him down. So it was a full coup, and Zeus called the Hecatonchires for help. They didn't know that Zeus could do it, but the Hecatonchires were giants that had supposedly hundreds of arms, and they were powerful giants that were huge, like they were like gods themselves. And he called the Hecatonchires for help, and the Hecatonchires came running to his aid. So when Hera and Apollo and Poseidon and his whole family was trying to tie him up and either kill him or suppress him down completely, when he called for help, the Hecatonchires came running, and they ultimately scattered everyone because they weren't going to be able to fight the Hecatonchires. They're too powerful, and ultimately they didn't even want to fight them because they get hurt, and they might kill the Hecatonchires, but ultimately it wasn't worth it. All the gods scattered and ran, and basically they saved Zeus. So Zeus got untied by the Hecatonchires and freed, and he was mad. So he made Apollo and Poseidon become human. And supposedly they had to build the walls of Troy while they lived among the Trojans. They were humans, and the Trojans knew who they were and thought they were gods. But understand, the Trojans actually thought they were gods, and they were not gods. They were humans that were gods. They were not. They were no longer gods, though. They were made mortal, and they got stuck in mortal bodies. However Zeus did it, he put them in mortal bodies and made them live in Troy for a year as a punishment. To build the walls of Troy, because Zeus loved Troy and wanted to protect the line of Priam and his grandfathers. They loved the Trojans, and the Trojans were worshippers of Zeus and Mars, and even Hermes. Less so Hermes, but we'll talk about in another video about Hermes. Okay, Hermes. Talk about Hermes now. Here's a way to understand Hermes. Okay, Hermes is. Now I'm going to give you an idea of how to understand the god Hermes, who became Mercury, the Roman god Mercury. What I want to give you is insights that are unique. So I'm trying to impress you in some manner, because the information I have is impressive. I think it's very impressive and exciting. And so when I get told this, well, God tells me, and I'm very honored and thankful to God for helping me, because without God I'm nothing, and I'm zilch. So if I have God, I have everything, and I'm like $1 million rich. Right now, I'm a billionaire, with God. If he helps me, if he talks to me, comforts me, makes me okay. Actually, I have to have it tangible. So I'm going to talk about Mercury, and how when you look at the difference in the names of the gods who were Greek in the plurality. Understand, Greek was a plurality and plural. And so it became singularized and Romanized. and Romanized Greeks became Romans. Now they became Romans that were singular in a singularity and had lost the plurality. Now the plurality was the goddesses, and the feminine presence empowered equally with the masculine presence. So when you're talking about Greece, what you're talking about is a power in the spirit of the Greeks. This is before Rome. There were Chians, Danans were included. These were basically, they would become Greeks. And the Greeks were the plurality of including the goddess as an equal power in the spirit, which meant that it was not singular, it was with her. So the Greeks had the goddesses with them in spirit. The men took her and had themselves and also him, so they could keep their god and goddess in their head both equally together. Like you have two sides of a brain. One side had God, the other side had goddess. So it was equal. That was called plurality. That was called the Greek way to take God and goddess the way it was. When Rome became Romanized, it wouldn't have been okay, because understand that they weren't going to Romanize or singularize and take out the goddess completely unless they could do it in a way that it could be accepted. Now understand why Enos, who is the Trojan line of the Troy, the one that survived, Enos was a Trojan soldier. He was the son of Venus, the goddess. She was a powerful, full-fledged planet-sized goddess. She's powerful and absolutely. She loved her son and she took care of him. She protected him, and actually, in battle, Enos almost died several times, and Venus intervened by coming on the battlefield. The goddess herself, when she saw her son in trouble in battle, about to die, she came and utterly stood in front of him and in a body and ultimately fought Diomedes. Diomedes tried to attack Enos and kill him, and Athena was giving Diomedes the power to do it. So ultimately, it could have been Minerva, and maybe I think it was Athena or Minerva, maybe Minerva, and not Athena. It was either Athena or Minerva that gave Diomedes a super human strength to attack Enos, who was the son of Venus, the goddess. So he was powerful himself. He was a demigoddess. So Enos was not a demigod. He was a son of Troy, a soldier of Troy, fought with Hector and Helenus and other people, and ultimately Enos almost died. Venus got injured because Diomedes was under the power of Minerva and Athena, so he was like completely invincible, coming at Enos, and Enos got taken off the field. The goddess came and snatched him away from Diomedes, so he couldn't kill him. He got saved many times, and because Venus was always saving Enos. Venus loved her son. Now understand that Hera hated Enos. She hated all Trojans. She wanted all the Trojans in line to die, every one of them, because they were egotistical and only Zeus. So the men of Troy were a singularity that ultimately lost the plural, or if it was plural, the divine feminine collective in Troy became singularity. Something went wrong big time with the ego at Troy. So if we have a problem with ego today and egotistical men that are selfish or do what they want, don't care about others, understand that mentality was not in the world before Troy. And at Troy, when the Trojan War started, the ego in men that was actually approved by Zeus, the god, the father of the gods, approved the ego, loved the ego. Zeus would have said, I like you to be important, and I want you to have a purpose and feel important about yourself and have pride, feel good, feel strong, like you're me. You take me, you are me. So the Trojans said, yeah, we take our God, we're powerful, we're strong, we're great. And ultimately, God loved it, said, good, and you're also great servants of mine and would do whatever I want. So basically, I approve of you to act appropriately. And they did. But ultimately, the struggle between the Trojan men and the divine masculine collective in Troy of the men as a collective in spirit, they fought against the divine feminine collective in spirit of the Trojan women. And we're going to talk about Mercury here, but I'm getting to Mercury and his importance. The Trojan men were fighting in the collective That means the spiritual collective is in the feelings. The men's feelings were struggling with the woman feelings. The spirit was struggling. And ultimately, the two collectives were fighting each other. And the women became so bad in Troy, so bad that they became wicked. So it was the influence of Minerva, specifically, who was utterly determined. And I'm not cutting Minerva down. What I'm saying is, I believe she betrayed Helenus. So Minerva was a goddess that wasn't very nice, and she definitely would. She might kill you if you're Trojan. She didn't like Trojans. She thought all Trojans should die. Well, I don't care if they're good or not. If there's no such thing as a good Trojan, a dead Trojan is good to me. That's what Minerva would probably said. Ultimately, because of that, Zeus didn't like her and called her a vixen daughter goddess. He just said, "You're a bad goddess. You kill men, and you kill them. They didn't even do anything wrong just because of their bloodline." Ultimately, I'm going to tell you that the story I got is that Minerva was that rough. She was a rough goddess, a tough goddess, badass, and she would kill you just because you were Trojan. And she would also use you and lie to you and even set you up. And the women reflected this behavior because they had Minerva. And so the behavior of the Trojan women was like as if. So here's an example of, and think about Mercury and Hermes, the god Mercury and Hermes. While I'm telling you the story about the Trojan women, it applies to Mercury and Hermes and what he became, how he became Mercury instead of Hermes. It has to do with what I'm talking about here. So the Trojan women were truly trying to become equal and not lose their equality. So they were equal, empowered with God, ultimately through Hera being an equal with Zeus. But Zeus didn't consider Hera an equal. Zeus told Hera, "You're my wife, and you are not equal to me. I am the father of all the gods and goddesses, and you are below me, wife." And Hera didn't like it because she was like, well, but I'm powerful and I can do what I want. Yes, you can. If I say you can, I have the final say. Well, Hera would kind of deny that. She would say, well, I'm the most powerful goddess. And well, what do you got a problem with me? No, I don't. So ultimately Zeus, I'm speaking like as if Zeus was telling Hera, you're not equal to me. I am the father of all the gods and goddesses. I'm your father and your husband, but your father foremost. So you're my daughter, wife. Like you're going to do what I tell you. And I'm above everybody. So she didn't like that idea. And ultimately that mentality of Zeus being in the Trojan men formed that feeling in the collective. And so it formed a feeling in the collective of the men that were feeling like Zeus felt against Hera. So understand, up on Mount Olympus, Zeus was the father of all the gods. He was having troubles up on Mount Olympus with Hera, the mother of all gods and goddesses. And they were arguing. So Hera, the main goddess, and Zeus, the main god, were having arguments and trouble because of Hera wanted to be equal to Zeus. And he said, you are, unless I say you're not. And she thought, but that's not good enough because you're saying I can be equal, but as long as I'm not equal. And ultimately, it was like a point. It was the point that counted. Hera was like, he says he's giving me equality, but he's also telling me he gets to have the last say. And ultimately, he can shut me down whenever he wants, and he does. So he's not giving me equality. So ultimately, Hera didn't like the idea that Zeus was taking the final say and commanding her to say, you're not equal to me, but I'll let you be equal or let you think you are. And ultimately, she didn't like it. She fought. She was against him and thought that's wrong. And all the women in Troy felt like Hera did and Minerva did. And Minerva was mad at the Trojans and wanted to kill the bloodline because the bloodline was going to support the idea of Zeus against Hera. The men in Troy were thinking to their wives, they were saying, you are my wife and my daughter, and I am the man of the house. I am the one ruling this household. And ultimately, it was just the behavior of Zeus towards Hera. It was against her. And ultimately, because Zeus, the father of all the gods, was against the mother of all the gods and goddesses, well, because of the struggle between Zeus and Hera, it caused a struggle. And the Trojan War was all about the struggle of the gods and goddesses, not the struggle of Troy. Troy was struggling because they were struggling. And they had the spirit of the gods and goddesses struggling. They were doing it, carrying it out, playing it out. Okay, now Mercury became a poison. Now understand, Mercury's poison, and it's also used in light switches. Now, understand that understanding I got from what Mercury became, what the Roman, it became a singularity that was Romanized, and ultimately it had the goddess in the bloodline only, which means it could have the goddess and deny her having her still. So understand the difference between a bloodline of people that are actually from the goddess in the bloodline. Like Enos he was the son of the goddess herself, Venus. So his bloodline that caused Rome to start was was a Venus line of Venus came straight from Venus. So it's true to say that the Romans, the entire Roman civilization, came into play and into existence as men who were from Venus, the mother Venus, the goddess, and they had a god. And maybe they didn't have a goddess. They singularized their behavior and took away the goddesses. So the Romans now were singularized, called Romanized, and they got rid of the goddesses. And understand, during the time that the goddesses all disappeared, it was because of the Romanization of Greek power and civilization that was ruling. Greek had the full rule of the world and owned the domain. The entire domain, spiritual domain, was owned by Greek, and Greek society and Greek spirit was ruling the world, plurality, both god and goddess equally. And when Rome and Enos came into power, it turned the entire world into a singularity, singularized, Romanized, and because it took away the goddess. She disappeared. But understand why it was allowed to happen. Because the bloodline of Venus was from Venus. So who started the actual Roman civilization was a line that came from Venus, the goddess, and it was also not going to support her anymore as a power important, which means she had a direct influence on Rome itself, and every Roman was under a direct influence of Venus in the bloodline. But she would try to influence them, and they didn't have a goddess anymore. They followed God only, which meant that it was a struggle now. Venus was under some form of resistance. The Roman men followed God only, singularized, didn't have her, and wouldn't take her, and ultimately they were her. So her influence was in them, and so she did influence them, and they also resisted her and said, no, we're not listening to you. We're Romans. We don't listen to goddesses. We listen to God only. And so you could look at the Roman society as people that were absolutely following only God. And in the bloodline of Romans, it was goddess doing it, denying goddess, influenced by goddess. It was a struggle. It meant that the spirit of the Roman man, the Roman people, would become stressed and in conflict. And ultimately, they had to conquer, because it was the Roman spirit was constantly needing to conquer things, because it was trying to conquer themselves. They were trying to conquer the spirit of Venus in them, and it was working. As long as they did the right thing, then Venus wouldn't be against them. If they started to do the wrong thing, Venus could go against them. Now, what happens if Venus goes against you? If you're from a bloodline of Venus, now let's think of Mercury and Hermes while I'm talking about Venus, because you want to think of Mercury and Hermes because it has everything to do with what I'm talking about. So the Romans, being from Venus herself, the bloodline of Venus that came from Troy, came from the Trojan society, city of God. Troy was a city of God. And now Rome was going to become the new city of God. It was not a city of goddess. And neither was Troy. Now understand, Troy used to be a city of goddess, and the whole Trojan conflict was about not becoming a goddess anymore. So what happened in Troy? The goddesses were all destroyed, and the goddesses all disappeared off the face of the planet in the Trojan conflict. After Troy, there were no more goddesses. It was only one god. And so understand that you'll find in history the dates are all wrong and things aren't right, which means if you look at what I'm saying, you're going to say there's dates off here. Like, how could it, like what you're saying it doesn't make sense, because like, yeah, the dates will be off. Sometimes they'll say they exist in 400 BC, but I'll tell you they might have existed in 1100 BC. So we might be talking about a story that is like in 1100 BC, and then it's also in 400 BC. And I'm saying, wait, what? Yeah, that doesn't make any sense. Well, I know it doesn't. There's a lot of things about history that's wrong, and it doesn't make sense. But what we're talking about makes sense. So it doesn't matter what time it happened. What we're talking about is really happened, whatever time it was. So Mercury now, who was Hermes, was a plurality. Now, understanding Hermes, I kind of want to do a video on Hermes alone. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop this video and I look at my next one. It'll be about Hermes, how to understand Hermes and what he is. Okay.